Imagine a town smaller than 15,000 people that once had more theater seats than Broadway, where Andy Williams and Glenn Campbell built venues with their own names on the marquee, and where tour buses lined up by the hundreds every single morning. Now picture that same strip today, with darkened marquees, abandoned timeshare condos, and a tourism tax report that keeps landing on the wrong side of the ledger. It's a genuinely strange trajectory for a town that, within living memory, was routinely compared to Broadway and Las Vegas in the same breath. So today, we're looking at the rise and fall of Branson, America's live entertainment capital, and why it's facing decline. From Ozark backwoods to boomtown. Long before anyone called Branson an entertainment capital, it was a fairly obscure fishing town tucked into the Ozark Mountains of southwest Missouri. Officially incorporated in 1912 and named after Reuben Branson, the local postmaster who ran the general store. What actually put the area on the map was a novel. Harold Bell Wright published The Shepherd of the Hills in 1907, a romanticized tale of Ozark mountain life that became an international bestseller, sold millions of copies, and made Wright the first millionaire author in American history. Curious readers started showing up in droves just to see the real hills the book described, and a tourism industry was born almost by accident. The novel's connection to the town runs deeper than most first-time visitors realize. Wright's story was loosely inspired by real people and places he encountered while staying in the area, and the book was adapted into 4 separate feature films over the following decades, each new release renewing public interest in the actual Ozark hillside the story was set in. Marvel Cave, a massive underground cavern near what would later become Silver Dollar City, had already been drawing curious visitors going back to explorations by Spanish expeditions in 1541 and further documented visits in the 1800s, giving the region a small but genuine base of tourist infrastructure even before Wright's novel supercharged interest in the area. In many ways, Branson's tourism industry has always been built on top of earlier layers of tourism industry. One attraction's popularity setting the stage for the next. The entertainment side of Branson's identity took shape decades later. In 1959, the Mabe brothers, 4 siblings who called themselves the Bald Knobbers, opened a hillbilly-themed variety show that's still running today, making it Branson's longest continuously operating theater. The Presley family followed in 1967 with their own country jubilee. Around the same time, the 1952 damming of the White River to create Table Rock Lake gave the area a genuine recreational draw beyond just live music, pulling in boaters and anglers alongside the theater crowd. By the late 1970s, an oil crisis actually threatened to choke off Branson's growth before it really got going, since visitors depended almost entirely on driving to get there, and local businessmen reportedly pooled together their own gasoline supply just to guarantee stranded tourists a full tank home. Regional entertainment infrastructure was already building in the area even before Branson itself became the destination. In 1954, legendary country singer Red Foley, a performer with 38 top 10 hits to his name, relocated to nearby Springfield to host the Ozark Jubilee, a nationally broadcast country music program that helped establish Southwest Missouri as a legitimate hub for live country entertainment years before Branson's own theater district took shape. That regional groundwork, combined with the ongoing popularity of Wright's novel and its 4 separate film adaptations, meant Branson wasn't starting from nothing when the Bald Knobbers opened their doors in 1959. It was building on top of decades of Ozark tourism that had already primed a national audience to associate the region with folksy, down-home entertainment. The 60 Minutes moment. Branson's transformation from a regional curiosity into a national phenomenon traces to a single broadcast. On December 8, 1991, CBS's 60 Minutes ran a segment dubbing Branson the live music capital of the entire universe, and the exposure set off what locals still refer to as the Branson boom. Theaters, hotels, restaurants, and shopping centers multiplied at a pace the small town had never seen. Nationally known entertainers who'd built their careers in Las Vegas and Nashville started relocating entirely, building their own namesake venues along what everyone simply called the Strip, Missouri Highway 76. The list of stars who put down roots in Branson through the 1990s reads like a greatest hits reel of American variety entertainment. Roy Clark, Mel Tillis, Boxcar Willie, Mickey Gilley, Mo Bandy, the Osmond Family, Andy Williams, Glenn Campbell, Tony Orlando, Bobby Vinton, and the Lennon sisters, among others. By the mid-1990s, Branson genuinely did have more theater seats than Broadway, and reports at the time described more than 100 separate performances happening across town on a single day, breakfast shows, matinees, and evening sets running practically non-stop. The scale of construction during this period is hard to overstate. In 1993, new theaters, hotels, and attractions in Branson totaled an estimated $119 million in investment, a record at the time that reflected just how much capital was pouring into a town whose year-round population barely cracked 5 figures. Roy Clark's own venue, the Roy Clark Celebrity Theater, is widely credited by longtime observers as one of the key catalysts that helped ignite the broader early 1990s construction boom, inspiring other performers to follow his lead and build their own namesake venues, rather than simply touring through rented halls. Showboat Branson Belle, a large paddle wheel-style dinner cruise boat offering dinner and a show on Table Rock Lake, and Dolly Parton's Dixie Stampede, a dinner theater built around a staged rodeo-style competition, both debuted in the mid-1990s as the boom reached its peak, cementing Branson's reputation as a place where practically any format of live entertainment could find an audience. Built on buses and timeshares. The engine behind that boom was a very specific kind of visitor. Retirees and senior citizens, often traveling in large groups by chartered tour bus, who came specifically to see 3, 4, or even 8 shows across a single multi-day trip. This demographic wanted wholesome, patriotic, family-friendly entertainment paired with all-you-can-eat buffet dining, and Branson built its entire economic model around serving them extraordinarily well. Riding alongside the theater boom came an aggressive timeshare industry, with developers building condo and cabin complexes throughout the Ozarks and pushing hard to convert vacationing tour bus retirees into recurring property owners. For a while, this worked exactly as intended, generating a steady stream of return visitors with a financial stake in coming back. But timeshare sales pitches earned Branson a reputation problem that outlasted the boom itself. High-pressure sales tactics and buyer's remorse became common enough complaints that, years later, one of the most visible search results for Branson timeshare was simply a website devoted to helping people sell theirs back. The scale of that timeshare build-out is easy to underestimate today. Dozens of resort properties scattered across the hills surrounding the theater district, many of them built during the height of the 1990s boom on the assumption that demand for Branson vacations would keep climbing indefinitely. When that demand instead began flattening and eventually declining through the 2000s and 2010s, a meaningful share of that timeshare inventory became difficult to sell, difficult to unload, and in some cases, difficult even to give away, since ongoing maintenance fees meant an unwanted timeshare could function more like a liability than an asset. Timeshare fraud attorneys operating in the Branson area today still field a steady stream of cases from owners looking for a way out of contracts signed decades earlier. A quiet but persistent reminder of just how aggressively that side of the boom was sold to visitors who, in many cases, had only come to town to see a show. Trying to modernize Branson Landing. By the early 2000s, city leaders recognized Branson needed more than theaters and buffets to stay competitive. And the answer was Branson Landing, a roughly $420 million waterfront development along Lake Taneycomo built through a combination of tax increment financing and municipal bonds that generated over $250 million for the project. Ground broke in 2004, and the development opened in phases starting in the spring of 2006, eventually bringing national retailers like Bass Pro Shops and Belk, a large convention center, hotels, and a synchronized light and fire water fountain show to the historic downtown. By most measures, Branson Landing succeeded on its own terms. Between 2006 and 2012 alone, the development reportedly generated more than $3.3 billion in total economic spending and supported thousands of jobs. It gave Branson a genuine second commercial anchor beyond the theater strip and pulled in a broader mix of shoppers rather than relying purely on evening show attendance. What Branson Landing couldn't do, though, was solve the underlying problem quietly building on Highway 76 itself, an aging entertainment model built around an aging audience that was, quite literally, running out of time. The financing structure behind Branson Landing is worth understanding on its own, since it shows just how far the city was willing to bet on tourism as its permanent economic foundation. Rather than paying for the project out of existing city budgets, Branson created a tax increment financing district specifically along the Lake Taneycomo waterfront, capturing a share of both local and state sales tax revenue generated by the new development to pay down the debt over time. Missouri's legislature had to specifically approve the state-level portion of that arrangement, an unusual level of state involvement that reflected just how significant Branson Landing was considered to the broader regional economy. By 2008, the development had already won a national award from the International Council of Shopping Centers for its design, and it remains to this day Branson's single most visited attraction according to the city's own tourism data, edging out even Silver Dollar City for total annual foot traffic. The slow fade of the celebrity theaters. The cracks in Branson's original theater-driven model started showing clearly by the mid-2000s. In 2014, comedian and songwriter Jim Stafford, a Branson fixture since the 1990s, refinanced his large namesake theater on the Strip and ultimately let the bank repossess it after the debt became unmanageable. Yakov Smirnoff, the Soviet-born comedian famous for his What a Country routine, performed his final Branson show in December of 2015, closing out one of the last remaining out-of-town celebrity residencies in town. Around the same period, longtime performers including Andy Williams, who passed away in 2012, and eventually Tony Orlando wound down their long-running Branson engagements as well. Andy Williams's death in particular carried an outsized symbolic weight for the town. His Moon River Theater, built in 1992 and named for his signature song, had functioned for 2 decades as arguably the single most prestigious venue on the Strip. A genuine A-list entertainer's home base that lent the entire town a degree of national credibility it otherwise struggled to earn given its reputation, fair or not, for lowbrow, cornball entertainment. With Williams gone, and most of his generational peers either retired or following him within a few years, Branson lost not just individual performers, but the very concept of the out-of-town celebrity residency that had defined its identity since the 60 Minutes segment first put the town on the map. What replaced those departures was largely homegrown talent and touring acts booked for shorter runs, a perfectly viable business model in its own right, but one that lacked the same singular star power that once made Branson feel like a genuine alternative to Las Vegas or Nashville. One theater historian who visited Branson in 2023 to research the town's entertainment industry described being struck by just how much genuine belief in live theater's power remained among performers and audiences alike, even as the broader national conversation had largely written the town off. That belief, though, wasn't enough on its own to keep every marquee lit. The Shepherd of the Hills Outdoor Theater, a Branson institution built around the very novel that put the town on the map, closed its long-running outdoor production after 54 years in October of 2018, a closure that felt, to many longtime observers, like watching one of the last threads connecting Branson's earliest tourism routes finally snap. The pattern of ownership churn extended well beyond the biggest celebrity names too. Properties like the Glen Campbell Good Time Theater changed hands repeatedly over the years, and the venue originally built around Roy Clark's residency eventually became the Hughes Brothers Celebrity Theater under new ownership, a fairly typical trajectory for Branson venues once their original namesake performer stepped away or passed on. One industry observer covering the local theater business described this churn as simply the culture of Branson real estate, a town where landmark, decades-old institutions like the Bald Knobbers and the Presleys remained the exception rather than the rule, and where most theater properties were expected to change hands, change names, or change formats entirely at least once every decade or so, as the entertainment landscape shifted underneath them. Storms and setbacks. Branson's troubles haven't been limited to shifting entertainment tastes. On February 29, 2012, an EF2 tornado with winds around 130 miles per hour tore directly through the city's theater district and downtown corridor, peeling roofs from buildings and blowing out windows along the Strip. The Bald Knobbers Jamboree, which had never before canceled a show for weather in its more than 50 years of operation, was forced to shut down for 4 consecutive nights while crews cleared glass, nails, and debris from the theater floor. The city's 110,000-square-foot convention center, central to Branson Landing's business tourism strategy, sat closed for months afterward due to water damage. Recovery from the tornado was relatively swift, with most businesses reopening within days. But the storm added yet another line item to a growing list of challenges facing a town already trying to modernize an aging entertainment product while fending off increasing competition from casino resorts in neighboring states and theme park destinations with considerably deeper marketing budgets. The 2012 tornado wasn't Branson's only brush with disruption from outside forces beyond its control. Like nearly every tourism-dependent economy in the country, Branson was hit hard by the 2020 COVID-19 pandemic, which shut down its theaters entirely for months at the height of restrictions and eliminated an entire spring tourist season the town depends on heavily. Unlike destinations with more diversified year-round economies, Branson's business model has always been particularly vulnerable to exactly this kind of sudden interruption, since so much of the town's annual revenue depends on visitors making discretionary, non-essential travel decisions during a relatively compressed tourist season. A single bad year, whether caused by weather, a pandemic, or simply a broader economic downturn that makes families think twice about a multi-day theater vacation, tends to hit Branson's finances harder and faster than it would a more economically diversified city of similar size. Ironically, Branson's pandemic recovery actually turned out stronger than many analysts initially expected, since the town's drive to accessibility and outdoor adjacent attractions made it an appealing option for travelers wary of flying or crowding into denser urban destinations during 2021 and 2022. That short-term pandemic-era bump is part of what makes the town's more recent 2024 and 2025 softness harder to interpret cleanly. It's not obviously a continuation of a straight-line pandemic recovery, nor is it obviously a return to the slower, steadier decline that predated COVID. It looks, instead, like a town whose underlying demographic challenges never actually went away, just got temporarily masked by a couple of unusually strong, pandemic-driven travel years. The demographic cliff. Perhaps no single factor explains Branson's long, slow decline better than simple demographics. The tour bus generation that built Branson's boom in the 1980s and 90s was, by definition, elderly even during the boom years, and that generation has been steadily passing away for the last 2 decades. A geographic and demographic profile of Branson visitors from the town's own tourism materials once put the average visitor age at 57, considerably older than the audience most modern entertainment destinations chase. One essayist who visited Branson repeatedly over the years and wrote extensively about its trajectory described watching quality erode in real time as the town's finances tightened along with its aging customer base. He noted that performers who once toured with full live bands, including genuine celebrity musicians, increasingly shifted toward pre-recorded backing tracks as production budgets shrank. Tourism officials have pushed back against the narrative of inevitable decline in recent years, pointing to newer attractions and reporting that the average visitor age has actually trended down toward the mid-40s as the city has worked to court younger families rather than relying solely on the retirees who built the town in the first place. The math behind this demographic shift is fairly unforgiving. A visitor who first came to Branson as a retiree during the 1991 boom, drawn by 60 Minutes and eager to catch a show from a performer they remembered from decades earlier on television, would be well into their 90s by the mid-2020s, if they're still alive at all. That entire cohort, the one whose sheer numbers and disposable retirement income built Branson's original economic model, has been steadily aging out of the traveling population for the better part of 2 decades now, taking with it both the spending power and the specific cultural nostalgia for performers like the Lennon Sisters and Andy Williams that made those original shows sell out night after night. Younger visitors simply don't carry the same built-in emotional connection to acts that peaked on television decades before most of them were born, which forces Branson's remaining venues to either replace that audience entirely with new programming or watch their built-in customer base continue shrinking year over year. What's still working? It would be inaccurate to describe Branson as uniformly struggling. Silver Dollar City, the Ozark-themed amusement park that predates the theater boom entirely, continues investing heavily in new rides and attractions, and by most industry accounts remains one of the most successful regional theme parks in the country. Sight and Sound Theaters, a for-profit Christian theater company producing large-scale biblical stage productions, has built a devoted following, regularly filling theaters with thousands of patrons per show for elaborately staged productions built around stories from Scripture. City officials have also worked to diversify Branson's calendar beyond its traditional 4-month tourist season. Efforts to market the city as America's Christmas Tree City, starting around 2015, helped boost winter visitation, and newer outdoor attractions built around the region's natural scenery have aimed to pull in younger families who have little interest in sitting through a variety show built around 1970s pop standards. The city set a visitor record of roughly 10.2 million guests in 2022, a genuinely strong number that tourism officials at the time described as something of a pleasant surprise, given widespread assumptions that Branson's growth had already plateaued years earlier. Silver Dollar City's continued investment tells its own story about what still works in Branson's tourism economy. The park has consistently poured money into new rides and attractions, including a major roller coaster overhaul in recent years, treating itself less like a static, nostalgia-driven attraction and more like a genuine competitor to the larger regional theme parks it's up against. That willingness to keep reinvesting stands in fairly stark contrast to the theater district's struggles, and it's not a coincidence that Silver Dollar City remains one of the few Branson institutions rarely mentioned in conversations about the town's decline. Sight and Sound's success tells a similar story from a completely different angle. Rather than trying to recreate the variety show format that built Branson in the first place, the company built something new entirely. A large-scale, high-production value religious theater experience with essentially no direct historical connection to the Baldknobbers or the Presleys, and it's thrived specifically because it never tried to compete on the old model's terms. Local business owners who've weathered multiple decades in Branson's tourism economy have started drawing a fairly consistent lesson from watching which venues survive and which don't. Standing still is, in practice, the same as declining. The properties and attractions that have continued reinvesting in new rides, new productions, or genuinely new formats have generally held their ground or grown. The ones that kept running the same show format with the same production values decade after decade, hoping loyal repeat visitors would keep showing up out of habit, have been the ones most likely to end up dark, repossessed, or quietly sold off to new owners chasing a different concept entirely. Where Branson stands now. Despite that 2022 high point, more recent numbers tell a murkier story. Branson's tourism tax revenue for 2024 came in at roughly $17.9 million, a decline of 2.5% from 2023, driven specifically by the theater category, which fell nearly 10% for the year, according to the city's own reporting. Branson's mayor, Larry Milton, has publicly emphasized that overall city sales tax revenue actually reached a new record in 2024, framing the theater-specific decline as a narrower, sector-specific issue rather than a broader economic collapse. City officials have acknowledged they're still trying to understand exactly why the theater category alone slipped so significantly, with some officials speculating it may partly reflect changes in how individual venues report their own attendance numbers, rather than a straightforward drop in ticket sales. Whatever the precise cause, the pattern fits a trajectory that's been building for the better part of 15 years. Modest, uneven progress on the tourism side broadly, layered directly on top of a genuine, ongoing erosion of the specific theater-based model that made Branson famous in the first place. The buses that once delivered wave after wave of retirees eager to see the Lennon Sisters or Glenn Campbell simply don't run the way they used to, and no amount of new outdoor attractions or Christmas marketing campaigns has fully replaced that lost audience with an equally devoted one. Early data from 2025 painted an equally mixed picture. Sales tax revenue for January of 2025 fell more than 11% compared to the prior year, alongside similar double-digit declines in the city's transportation and public safety sales taxes, both of which are directly tied to overall visitor spending. Branson's own city officials have been careful not to frame these numbers as a crisis, consistently pointing to the broader record-setting sales tax totals from 2024 as evidence the local economy remains fundamentally sound. But the specific, repeated softness in categories tied directly to theater attendance and overall tourist spending suggests the underlying issue driving Branson's decline, an audience that's aging out faster than a new one is arriving, hasn't gone away just because the town found new ways to generate revenue around the edges of it. A town still finding its second act. Branson's story doesn't fit neatly into either a straightforward tragedy or a straightforward comeback. It's a town that built an entire identity and an entire economy around a specific generation's specific taste for wholesome variety entertainment, rode that formula about as far as it could possibly go, and is now working out, in real time and without much of a roadmap, what a live entertainment capital looks like once the audience that built it has largely moved on. Some of what made Branson special, the family-run jamboree shows, the natural beauty of the Ozarks, the sense of a genuinely different kind of American vacation, is still there for anyone willing to look past the empty theater marquees to find it. Whether that's enough to carry the town through its next act, the way the Bald Knobbers and the Presleys carried it through its first, is a question Branson itself still seems to be answering one season at a time. There's a particular irony sitting at the center of Branson's decline that's worth sitting with for a moment. The very qualities that made the town's original boom so remarkable, its total, unwavering commitment to one specific style of nostalgic, patriotic, family-friendly entertainment, are the same qualities that made it so vulnerable once that specific audience began to disappear. A more diversified entertainment town, one that had hedged its bets across multiple genres, age groups, and formats from the beginning, might have weathered the generational transition more gracefully. Branson instead bet almost everything on one extraordinarily specific formula, and for roughly 2 decades, that bet paid off spectacularly. It's only in hindsight, watching theater after theater go dark along Highway 76, that the downside of that same total commitment has become fully visible. What happens next likely depends less on any single new attraction or marketing campaign, and more on whether Branson can find a genuinely new identity that doesn't simply try to recreate its 1990s peak with younger performers singing the same style of songs to a shrinking audience of nostalgic retirees. Silver Dollar City and Sight and Sound both point toward one possible answer: build something that stands on its own merits rather than leaning entirely on borrowed nostalgia, and the audience, whatever generation it happens to belong to, tends to follow. Whether the rest of the strip can pull off that same reinvention, theater by theater, remains very much an open question, and one that Branson's own tax revenue reports will likely keep answering, a few percentage points at a time, for years to come. If you enjoyed this look at the rise and fall of America's live entertainment capital, give this video a like and subscribe for more deep dives into the destination's history built up and then quietly left behind.